Beep! What is up, ninjas? My name is Sam World, and welcome to the complete guide to master Diva. In the first episode, we talked about the oscillator section and how we can use it, just that section, to make sounds. Now, in today's video, we're going to be activating the filter section, where you're going to be able to, one, add a bit of character to the sound. I mean, there's a reason why people spend about $2,000 on a Moog synthesizer, and that is the color that the filters provide, as well as the oscillators that they have. But again, very important is that filter, which digital synths are just not that great at capturing. Diva gets super close to it though, and that's the beautiful thing about it. And finally, three, guys, you can subtract. So with synths, when you have a synth, let's say like a saw, and you want to turn it more into a bass that is warm, fat, and doesn't have a lot of high harmonics, aka high frequencies, then that's where the filter section comes into play. Once we activate envelopes, it will help in shaping the sound as well, but that's going to be for the next video. With that being said, guys, if you want to support the channel, you can head over to evilsounds.com, where you can find all my Serum sound banks. I sadly don't have any Diva ones yet, but I promise you they're going to be coming. And let's get straight into this tutorial. All right, guys, and welcome inside of Diva. So the first thing we're going to do is go into the preset section, templates, and init mini mono, so that we get the Moog inspired kit. So we talked about the triple VCO, which we're going to be using for explaining the filters, and we're just going to use the saw for this example here, which is going to sound like... Okay, I am going to have span opened up here when I start filtering, so you can see what it's all about. And I'll try and explain it in newbie terms if this is your first time learning a synth. And of course, a little bit more advanced stuff as well. Okay, now VCF stands for voltage controlled filter, if you want to impress your friends. And the ladder filter is what the Moog is known for. And you're going to see this a lot in like Serum. Silent is usually the ones they're going to be using, or emulations of it. Okay, now first off here, guys, you're going to have your cutoff. Now, depending on the kind of filter you have, which this one's going to be a low pass filter, that means that you're going to start to filter out your high frequencies all the way down until you get no sound at all. Now, the low pass is really good for creating bass sounds. A lot of times your basses, you don't want to have them have too much upper harmonics if your track is revolving around a lot of melodies, arps, pianos being on top of it. Just due to the fact that if you have a bass like... it takes up a lot of space in the mix. So with the low pass filter, we can kind of remove those highs on the saw and make it sound at the same time a little thicker. Okay, that's the thing. Now, to the right of the cutoff filter, you're going to have your ladder mode switch here. Now, that's what ladder means. You can switch between different modes. And in the original Moog ladder filter, you had a 24 dB one, an 18 dB, a 12 dB, and then I believe it was a 6 dB. Now, all this means is the fact that a 24 dB is going to cut a lot more abrupt, while a 12 dB is going to be a little bit more like smooth. Notice how the frequency here is changing. So that's going to be the difference between a 12 dB and a 24 dB. Now, the way that I use this for sound design, and why is it even important, is just due to the fact that if I'm trying to make a bass or a sub and I really just want to have a certain amount of frequencies, and you use a more abrupt cut like the 24 dB pole. And if you want some of the highs to be more lenient, you still want a little bit upper harmonics in there, then you go with a 12 dB one. So that those are going to be like the main reasons why you would want to switch from them. Okay. Below that, we're going to have the emphasis, which is the resonance. And the resonance will usually work depending on the filter you're using. It's going to do essentially a boost on that cutoff frequency. So let's assume I have it here at 12 o'clock. And that cutoff frequency, let's say, is 1K or around there. When you do this emphasis boost, you're going to be boosting on that cutoff. Makes that more pronounced. And this is super useful if you're creating sort of like, you know, the classic kind of old school sound. If you want to make funky sounds, this is where you're going to go. Maybe not, the emphasis not as high. So once we access filters, or sorry, envelopes, we're going to be able to move this guy a lot more, but that's going to be the thing there. Now, with the cutoff back to the default, we're going to throw the emphasis back down. As we know, that's where the boost is going to happen. Let's go back to our bass sound, because that's what I usually use low passes a lot for, and for shaping the sound. Sounds great. Okay, from there, we're going to have modulation sources, which are going to be found here and here. Now, this, again, if you remember how I said, the purpose of a filter is, one, to add color. Certain filters will add certain kind of warmth, character to the sound. The second one is to shape the sound. So utilizing your envelopes, you can shape this filter And I'll show you guys an example. We'll cheat a little because the way this tutorial series works is just, again, we're not going to use envelopes to create any sounds until we get to it and explain it fully. But this is how you would start to shape. Okay, the filter. Now you can go positive, which is going to make the filter open up this way and then down. So imagine this envelope right now is doing this at a really fast rate. To make it sound punchy, give it that shape, okay? From there, you can go negative, so if you're up, then you can do a negative sort of push where you're coming up from here and a decay. So with modulation sources, this is going to allow you to shape the sound utilizing the filter. So you can get cool stuff like... which are good, again, if you want to make wubs and stuff, you will use attack decay, but we're going to talk about that in the next episode. If you already know how to do that, cool. But again, these are going to be your modulation sources, and by default, you have envelope 2 and LFO 2, which for me, usually it's just what I'm going to keep there unless you're going into more experimental sound design. But LFO 2 here, you're going to be able to activate it over here, obviously. And again, the higher you put it, it's just how much you're opening the filter up. And if you have the filter up and you want to go negative, then it's just going to make the filter go down instead. Okay. So that's going to be our modulation sources, guys. Pretty simple. As long as you understand that we're moving this cutoff in a certain way and you're going to utilize either an LFO or an envelope, that's the important thing. And again, we're going to talk about what the difference between envelope, LFOs, etc. is in the next episode of the modulation sources and whatnot. Now, let's go back to our beautiful saw. And this time, let's get a square in here, just really, really high up, like C3. Okay, and now let's put our cutoff around 12 o'clock. Okay, so beautiful sound. Okay, now below that here, we're going to have a couple of more settings when it comes to the VCF filter. And as we move along through the rest of the filters, a lot of these are going to repeat. It's just going to change the way that it looks and then the way that you're going to use it. But next to that, we're going to have here the key follow, which, you know, key bed or keyboard, whatever. And the idea of this is the fact that obviously when you're playing low frequencies, you might want this sound to not have upper harmonics, but let's say that you jump an octave up or you decide to, I don't know, play really high up with the same lead, then that's where the keyboard follow comes into play. Because as we go higher up, the filter is opening up. If I put this at 0, but now if I put the keyboard bed, or sorry, the key follow, you can see that the filter is opening up more. So what the keyboard does here is, again, it's just going to make the filter move along with the keys. As you go higher up, the filter opens up a lot more to allow the upper harmonics of the lead. Let's say you're not playing it as a bass anymore and you go up 2 octaves, it's going to open it up more so you can actually hear the melody. Because obviously if I have something like a bass filtered here, and that sounds good. But if if I'm like all the way up here, you can't really hear it. So that's where that feature comes into play and why we want to have it. And this is a way you create some really dynamic full sounds, because let's say you're playing a melody like, you can have the filter moving constantly, making the sound a lot more dynamic and like it's alive. Now, of course, there are other ways to do this. Like you can put an LFO slightly moving at a slow speed that constantly changes the filter to make the sound feel like it's alive. But again, you can utilize the key bed follow as well, just for a similar effect that's a little bit more like predictable. The next knob that we're going to have, guys, is the FM Oscillator 1 knob. And I'll be honest with you guys, in this scenario here with the filter, I'm not too sure how it works, but the way that I use it and the way that I recognize what it does and when I want to use it is the fact that it's going to make the sound a lot more grittier, and it can also help in creating some nice little artifacts, textures with the filter. If you guys know how it works, you can tell me. So I'm not too sure if it's automating the cutoff or applying the linear FM frequency modulation to this guy or to the sound coming out of the cutoff, because the manual doesn't really state that well. But again, I'll show you guys an example. So here I have a saw just being played. Now, FM from Oscillator 1, I don't know, again, if that's going to alter with Oscillator 1, but when I move Oscillator 1, it does affect it. So I'm assuming Oscillator 1 has a role to play in the FM and what it's doing here. So we're going to move this up. And you can already hear the grittiness that it's adding. Now, from there, we can play around with the frequency, obviously. Okay, and then if we play low, you hear it sounds like it's moving the filter because I have this playing at such a low frequency, such a low rate that we can actually hear the tun tun tun. I wonder if I move it up. Just there it is. Okay, so it might be applying it just to the filter cutoff. And when you move something very fast, which we'll talk about in the LFO section, it adds a bit of grit. So I think that's how this is working. You can see how much it adds to the sound. It just makes the sound come alive. Maybe have it like kind of not go too high up, high emphasis, lower. And you can do some interesting combinations there. From there, we're going to move on to the Cascade. Now, this is where it starts to get a little bit more like just sort of, how do you say it, preference on which one you want to use. So here we have the Cascade Filter, which again reminds you of the Juno one. Obviously, the difference here is the cutoff is a knob. Okay, we're going to have a resonance, emphasis. Okay, we're going to have our keyboard follow here. So again, the higher you play, the more the filter opens up, and the lower you play, the more it closes. Okay, from there, we're going to have the color of it. So like we talked about, a filter will usually give color to a sound, and all that means is it might make it sound a little bit more, might add harmonics, aka saturation to it. Depending on how hard you're pushing the sounds into it, it does a lot. So from this one, it's just kind of going between them, which one you like more. You can see there's a slight change in tone that is not as noticeable, but to some people, they might hear that and just feel like, wow, that's the change I was looking for. Okay, below that, we're going to have, again, the FM oscillator, and then we're going to have our modulation sources, the envelope and the LFO here. So again, this is just going to help in shaping. So you put the cutoff all the way down. And let's say we have this. Okay, so that's how we shape the sound down, make a little pluck. Okay, and we'll talk more about how the envelopes are working on the cutoff again, but these are going to be the modulation sources. Pretty simple, the Cascade. I'm sure there's a lot more to it in terms, like I said, guys, there's a reason why a lot of people own a bunch of different synths, and that is due to the filters. For instance, right now, over the weekend, I actually bought the Moog Matriarch mainly because I was missing the filter. But the filter it has, obviously, it's a ladder, but it's a weird combination of both. While a Moog Sub 37 will have the standard ladder filter, and it sounds a certain way. A Prophet from Dave Smith, which is, again, just a different synth, will have a Curtis-type filter, which sounds a little bit not as good as a Moog, but it's good for other things. So filters play a huge role, and the reason you might switch between them is just that you prefer the sound of one over the other, or you're trying to access certain features. As you're going to see as we move along, there's going to be some stuff you can do with certain filters that you can't do with the other one. Now we move on to the multi-mode here, and this is going to be one of the ones where you might want to reach for if you're looking for a different kind of filter. So far we've been talking about low passes, which again, you cut your highs off from the right to the left as you move it, or from the bottom up, from the top down. Now here we're going to have the multi-mode filter, which is super useful. We have the low pass 4, low pass 2, so you guys already know that has to deal with how abrupt the cut is on a low pass. From there we have a high pass, which is going to be the opposite of a low pass. Let's say we have a bass and you want it to sound this way, but you want to use it as a top layer for another bass, then you use, so you're just cutting out the lows. And again, the resonance is going to boost at that cutoff point. So you can do effects like that, and you can again have it high if you try to make acid sounds or resonating style of sounds, okay? And finally, guys, the last filter we have on here is the bandpass filter, the BP. It's like the low pass and high pass had a baby, so it focuses in on one frequency, and that frequency is the one you set the cutoff to. So for instance, and then it just focuses and moves along. Notice how the low end is shaped in the high pass. So that's the difference between, again, going to be between the filters. Now, the bandpass is useful for certain kind of sounds, and I personally like to use it for one basis whenever I want to create something like something eerie sounding. The thing is, you need a certain kind of distortion to apply, and then obviously in Diva we're gonna have the rotary, which is not my favorite distortion in any form. Because now the bandpass just kind of gives. But the bandpass can be really useful for creating these kind of sounds which focus in on a certain frequency. But again, if you're going to distort heavily afterwards, the bandpass is good for doing really cool stuff to just add to, let's say, a frequency as you feed it into a distortion unit, which we will talk about at a later date. Okay, from there, we're going to have the bite filter. And the bite filter, again, it's just cutoff, low pass. And this one's going to be one of the more like snappy filters, let's say. And again, I think it's modeled after the Korg MS-20 filter. That's what I'm going to assume because it looks exactly like it. But the idea here, again, is we can shape it. And from there, you know, you can see how snappy that is. Now, the question is, we move to a ladder. Let's do that and then go back to the bite. Now back to ladder. There's a bit of a difference in terms of the tonality. Again, the character that the filter gives. Ladder. Bite. Okay. From there, we can apply the resonate, which is going to be the peak. So, okay, now let's go ladder now that we have the resonation up. Oh, fuck yeah, you can tell the difference. So that's going to be the difference between the ladder and that, and I guess it's going to be the resonation. Now, with this one, you also have different modes, Rev 1, Rev 2. Again, just... Sorry if I'm clipping a little. Let's lower the volume down a bit here from the output. And it's just hearing. So just different kind of color that you're going to be adding. And honestly, I feel a lot of times it has to deal with this resonation knob here or the peak knob. So to the left, we have the keyboard follow, envelope 2, LFO 2. You guys get the idea of that. All right, guys, and finally, the last filter we're going to look at before we start making some sounds with the filter now is at the Uhbie. So the Uhbie is fairly new to Diva, and this is going to be the only place where you're going to have access to a band reject sort of filter and also a morph modulation if you want to do that. Now, I'll explain what this stuff is useful for, but let's just look at where everything's at. It looks a little intimidating, but you already know most of this. So you have your cutoff. Again, when you're in a low pass, it cuts. You can turn this into a high pass with the morph. Okay. Then from here, this is the difference here. You're going to have a band reject and a band pass. So when you're in between the morph, this is the kind of filter that you're going to have. So you can have a band pass, which we talked about, focuses in on that frequency. Or you can have a band reject, which is the opposite of a band pass. So everything but that frequency you're on is getting reduced. In a band pass, it's focused on. In a band reject, it's the opposite. As you can see, it's the opposite of that. So instead of, you know, just cutting out the rest, and yeah, it's the opposite. You're cutting out that frequency with the cutoff. Excuse my language. Now, this is super useful if you're into drum and bass, respaces and stuff, because you can do a lot of really cool movement with it. Okay, that's the first thing. It adds this sort of movement to it, and it definitely gives the sound more of a vibe that's a little bit more like hollow. But again, you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. Okay, now the cool thing about the morph here is that you can then morph in between like your low pass and high pass. So if we do this. Okay, so essentially this is just moving that back and forth. So that's what we would use this for. To add movement to a sound, but we can also, you know, that's the idea of it. But when you run stuff like this through distortion changes it a lot. Like, because again, the sound being routed into distortion will create nice sounds out of what we have. And again, you can put a high resonation. Okay, but that's going to be the Uhbie filter, guys. Again, it looks a little intimidating. I get it. Band reject, band pass, that's all. And again, you can do a lot of cool stuff with this. Now, the last filter we're going to look at, the last set of filters, is going to be accessed by changing from triple VCO to dual VCO or any other one. So we don't have this mixer here now anymore. And let's put this back to a ladder here, just like this. And then we're going to have the feedback, which again, is just routing the sound back into itself after it's been filtered. And then we're going to have a high pass filter, which we already talked about. It just cuts out the lows. But the cool thing about this here is the fact that when you make a lot of, let's say, you know, we decide to make like a beautiful pluck, and we'll use this guy here, open it. Let's add a bit of reverb and just cheat so I can show you guys what I mean. Notice that when you hear that, it sounds good, but you know if when you put it in a song that a lot of these frequencies down here, let's say I move this up real fast just so you guys can see. This guy in particular is going to cause a lot of issues. So a lot of people will go to an EQ and they'll just reduce down on that. But for me, the thing is I make presets for a living. So when I make these sounds for people, I want to make sure that they're usable. The moment they use them, they're like, wow, that just fit right in. It gives them a good sort of a good reaction to my presets, going like, wow, every time I use his presets, everything just seems to kind of just fit in the track. And again, it's a lot of work that you got to put into it, but if you understand the theory behind it, then you know, okay, most people are not going to be using this sound. It's going to be a pluck sound, and they're going to be using it as a bass, so I can remove some of the low end for them so that when they put it, again, it just becomes useful. So what we're going to do here is, one, you can boost, again, those low frequencies, or you can cut with 1, 2, more abrupt, and then 3. And notice how that bottom part that you wouldn't want in a song just goes away. So now if I can go higher up. Now 0, 3. Sounds a lot cleaner. So again, when you're making sounds, or let's say you're the type of person that just wants to use presets, when you have that high pass filter, you can use it for one EQing, which I feel like, again, it's always cleaner when you fix it in the synth with the programming. Let's say you want a sound punchier, then you reach for a transient designer when you could have just gone into the synth and made it punchier yourself. Which one do you think will produce the more pleasing, more organic results? So that's why it's very important that you understand this here. So this one's pretty self-explanatory. Instead of having a knob, you kind of switch between those, and I use it heavily when I'm making leads, plucks, and stuff where I know like, hey, I'm going to have too much of that mid-low frequency. I need to use a high pass for this. So we're going to go with the next is the high pass pre. Very similar to the other one, except now you have more control. Okay, it's very beautiful sounding. And finally, guys, the last high-pass filter we're going to look at is the HPF Vite, which is one of my favorite filters. Now, there are two revisions of this. You're going to have 1 and 2, and the difference between 1 and 2 is that one of them will actually act as a high-pass, while the other one is a lot more subtle. So, for instance, Rev 1. Notice that. Got enough bass, lower the peak. Notice that it doesn't really add much, but Rev 2, now it's acting like a real cutoff, okay? We're moving those lows. Now, the thing I like about this guy a lot is in the Korg MS-20, the bass response on it wasn't that good. You made a saw bass. It sounded okay, but it didn't sound juicy or big. So one of the things we can do, again, this is more of an advanced tip, is use the self-oscillating feature or the boost feature, high peak, and then focus in on the frequency. And now if I get rid of it, we can try the Rev 1. Maybe it's a little more subtle. Go feedback. You can kind of see the difference there, HPF Vite. Just bring life into it. But again, you can also apply like really nice sort of textures to the bass. Like for instance, if you're gonna boost your mid-lows, you can do it with this guy. It's kind of like adding life. Now we can control that peak with the peak until we get sort of like a rounded bass that I would like to see in a track. Now from there we can open. And now just get rid of it. You have that, but then makes it sound a little deeper and has a certain vibe of its own. And again, you could do it with. We want to make it sound brighter. So with all of that out of the way, guys, we can now focus on making some sound. So let's get straight into it. All right, guys, so let's create our first sound. So we're going to init to a template of a mini mono. And the first thing we can do is create maybe like a nice little solid that's kind of warm. So we're going to go with that guy there. But let's say I want to kind of get like a lo-fi-ish or old vibe on it. Then what we can do is lower the cutoff. We can add a bit of noise. Which is going to give us that. Now, if I want to kind of make it sound a little more lush, we can cut him in with another saw and detune. Okay, kind of like very Euro, if that's the thing. And we can make it into a Reese, where now we can do that. And then, of course, you can move the filter to just... We can add a +7 now, so a fifth there, go up an octave. Sounds so nice. A little bit of resonance so that we can hear that cutoff closing and opening more. We can add a bit of feedback just to give it more dirt. Now let's create another type of sound. So I'm going to utilize the Juno 60 init template patch. I'm going to have here the chord and minor feature from Ableton, which again is just a hack to play chords. So here I have these beautiful saws, but I feel like they sound just a little tad bit too much. So we're going to use the cutoff to kind of remove some of the highs. I also don't like the nasty kind of low frequency that we get, that one that you're going to remove. So we're going to use this guy. Is that a bit of resonance? See how that sounds like? Okay, so that sounds really nice. And again, utilizing this guy there to just kind of mess with that a bit. And you can keep going. Maybe we can kind of mess with this. But let's try using maybe the Uhbie filter now with a bandpass. So this kind of creates more of a lush kind of vibe, sort of, how would you say it? We'll put the thing up here. Patty. And again, here I'm just playing chords, so obviously the sound sounds really good. But again, the idea of the filters is to subtract and to add to the sound. But the filters, again, will help a lot. And next time we go over more stuff, we can utilize these guys here to shape the sound. And that's the first thing we're going to do once we know how to use our ADSRs and we talk about. But again, the most important thing for you to understand is that the filters are there to help in subtracting, adding character to a sound, adding texture to a sound. A lot of cool features that you can utilize with emphasis cutoff. With that being said, guys, I have to get going. My wife came and she said food is ready. So I couldn't make many sounds for you guys, but hopefully you get the idea and the concept and theory behind utilizing the filters in Diva. With that being said, I'll catch you guys in 2 days for the next episode. You guys take care and you guys have a great rest of your day.